Welcome to EPH 456, where we seek to understand the truth. In John 17:17, Jesus said, "Thy word is truth." This week, we continue our verse by verse study in the book of Job with part 10. Hope you enjoy. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this day. Thank you for bringing us together again. We ask, Lord, that you would open up our hearts and our minds that we might receive what you have for us tonight. Look at things objectively, as we all should. We ask all these things in Jesus' name, amen. All right. Wednesday. Get all these chords and stuff out the way before we get started. All right. So, it is hard to believe that we are in Job part 10. We've been in Job for almost 3 months, verse by verse. It has definitely been a journey. Interesting thing about journeys is you think when you plot your destination, which was, in our particular case, it was getting through the book of Job, and we've all had our preconceived notions of what the book was and the story and what it all meant. But for me personally, and obviously it means something different to all of us, but for me personally, I did not think that I would learn as much as I've learned regarding communication when it works with Job. And it's just very interesting to see how there are stories within the verse by verse when you get through and breaking them down to what they really mean and what the Bible really says, the lessons that you can learn. Pretty phenomenal. So we are in part 10 of Job. We went through the histories of Job. We went through several mysteries of Job. We went through the whole story of Job, essentially, and we're coming toward the end. We went through the attacks. We went through multiple rounds of confrontation or debate or whatever you want to call it between Job and his friends. And 2 of the 3 are done. Two of the 3 of his friends are done making comments. Last week we got through Eliphaz, I want to say round 3. Yes, last week we got through Eliphaz round 3. And tonight the goal is to get through Bildad's round 3 comments and Job's response and his conclusion. And tonight Job will rest his case. What's interesting is at the very end, the Bible says, and the words of Job are ended. As in, I said all I could say. So the plan is, tonight will mark the end of the commentary between Job and his 3 friends. And next week, the conversation will shift to a 4th character who has not been introduced yet. This guy's name is Elihu, and Elihu is more junior, or shall I say younger or less experienced than Job's other 3 friends that we've been going through understanding their debate so far. And Elihu brings some interesting perspectives, somewhat different than the other 2, both to Job on Job's rebuttals and then also to his 3 seniors, which would be, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And we'll get through all of his commentary next week. And then the following week, we will finish the book of Job, finish our verse by verse study, and as it begins, as the story of Job begins, which is, as you guys know, it began with God, the Alpha, the Omega, and the beginning and the end. And 2 weeks from now, it will end with God, summing it all up. So with that, I'm going to skip the recap from last week. Sometimes my recaps go a little lengthy and I don't make as much progress as I want to. So this week I'm going to skip that and trust that if there is something that you guys missed, you can just jump online and look at it again if you want, because we're all up to date, caught up from last week. Last week's lesson is posted. So with that, I'm going to pick up exactly where we left off. So last week we concluded with Job's rebuttals to Eliphaz's final comments. And Bildad has yet to speak. And as it is his turn, what's interesting that I find about this round with him, it's very, very short. It's very abrupt. In fact, I want to say that his response is only 6 verses. That's it. It's very short. It's very brash. And I think that says something. Obviously, I won't say obviously, but without looking at the chapter number, now it's 25, you can understand, though, even without looking and saying, okay, yeah, we're in chapter 25, you will be able to tell that the conversation between Job and his 3 friends are winding down, just based on the comments that you're going to listen to Bildad make tonight and Job's rebuttals. It's going to end similar to a lot of our debates, and we'll talk more about that. So, again, in summary, Zophar, he checked out 2 weeks ago. He was done. He made it to round 2, didn't quite make it to round 3. Eliphaz gave it a solid 3rd run last week, which we went over, and Bildad no doubt sees that his argument and the points that he's trying to make to Job are just not making a dent. And Job is settled in his conviction. And where it was once I don't want to say compromise, but maybe unsteady Job, a questioning Job, at the end of tonight, you'll see it's nothing sort of just, Job's a rock, man. Straight up rock. And it would appear that Bildad would have seen that or sensed that. And I think that's why he keeps his commentary short. It's kind of like, I guess I could explain it like this. It's kind of like if you're in an argument, which we all have been, and you realize that, well, there's a point in the argument where you sense that the other person just isn't going to see it your way. So both of you start to slow down with fewer words, and then it kind of gets a little bit more quiet, You start to slow down, they start to slow down until the conversation ultimately stops without a conclusion. And this is where we are in the flow of their debate. There's been points, there's been counterpoints. Job has provided his defense. His friends have given them their offense. And it's as if everybody said everything there is to say. And the debate is coming to a close. So a couple quick points on Bildad's final commentary in summary before we get into the verse-by-verse piece of it for all of us to look at and look for as we read these verses. So number one, in this final last-ditch effort to convince Job that he's right, he points to the power of God, and he emphasizes there's a dominion and fear. Both belong to God. And he's really emphasizing God's authority. And we're going to touch a little bit about that because I don't want to say it's disingenuous, but in some ways I think it's passive aggressive. And we'll touch a lot more on that. He also talks about and emphasizes man's flaws and his imperfections. And he tries to make a point to throw Job's question from chapter 9, which is, how can a man be righteous with God? Great question. But he throws it back at Job, and he starts adding some stuff to it, like almost like it has a judgmental emphasis to prove his point. Next point you will pick up is there's a humiliation of humanity, I guess, for lack of a better way to express it, stating man is a worm, not significant compared to God. He's a worm. But what's interesting about that, and we'll touch a little bit, there's some passive aggressiveness in there that we're going to draw out. And then finally, there's this in the finale, you can feel the passion that Bildad has in his final speech, having run out of new points to make, run out, and he's simply repeating himself. He's run out of everything to say. He just kind of continue, putting forth and repeating this dogmatic view of his righteous retribution or whatever it is. And at that point, as you guys will know, if you can't convince somebody by saying it, try to convince them by screaming it, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So with that, let's get right into Job 25, verse 1. Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, dominion and fear belong to him. He makes peace in his high places. He's talking about God. Is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not rise? How then can a man be righteous before God? Or how can he be pure who was born of a woman? Even the moon does not shine, and the stars are not pure in his sight. How much less man, who is a maggot, and a son of man, who is a worm? And those are his comments. That's it. But he said a lot there. And I think first I'll summarize what he's saying there. First thing, he's establishing who God is when he says something like dominion and fear belong to him. He makes peace in his high places. Is there a number to his armies? All of these things, right? Upon whom does his light not shine? Meaning that God is over everyone. There's nobody that his light does not shine upon, right? So all of that is to say, who is man compared to the Almighty? That's ultimately what he's trying to say. And then he asked that question, because God is so great, how can a man be justified with God when God finds fault with the sun and the moon? Meaning the sun and the moon aren't even perfect. So how can, and man is less than them. So how can you ever assume that God would think that man could be justified before God? Right? So that's where it gets in this verse 5 when it says, even the moon does not shine and the stars are not pure in his sight. What he's saying there is they're not even perfect. And if they are over man, how much more can man not be perfect? I didn't say that right, but you get what I'm trying to say. And that's ultimately his conclusion. When he says man is nothing but a worm. He is, let me get this right, how much less man, who is a maggot, and the son of man, who is a worm. Now, if you just read it, you'll be like, oh man, he's right. He's right. But I want you to look back and examine this under the lens of the back and forth that has been going on between Job and his friends. See, this piece right here is what I find really interesting about Bildad's final commentary. And you may have recalled having this happen to you. So I will try to use this, try to make this example fairly simple with the story, I guess. So I was in a debate with another religious person who should not be named. This debate was on several different topics. We were going back and forth, and it lasted about 2 hours, this debate. And having solidified and proven my points, backed on the word, thoroughly, I might add, the person I was debating recognized, you know what, there wasn't a way for them to really counter what I was saying, because it was pretty cut and dry. It's pretty plain to see. So as a result, you can feel within the flow of the conversation that person starts to feel trapped. And so what typically happens when somebody runs out of points to make, like this person did, they get passionate. They start raising their voice as if saying it louder and saying it more passionately is going to make it more powerful. And we've all done it. When you've ran out of points to say, you say your final points. If you're reiterating it or not, you've raised your voice and try to speak with more authority, which honestly is totally to the contrary of what truly is. Because when you do that, it's actually a tale that lets the other person know that the debate is really over and that they've won, whatever that means. So in this particular case, this is what Bildad is doing in his story. He's basically saying with these, he's like, and how much less is man, who is a maggot, and the son of man, who is a worm. He's saying that with emphasis because he knows Job feels like he is justified with God based on his actions and behavior. And Bildad's counterpoint to that is that how can you just asked us 9, how can a man be justified with God? But when Job asked it, he asked it under the perspective of how can I plead my case to God that I'm not evil? Bildad rebuttals Job, 14, 15 chapters later, 16 chapters later, with, yeah, you're right. You can't be justified with God because you're a worm. And there's the two takes on that question. I just find it interesting that we've seen this in with a lot of different debates. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that's happened. Where, you'll be in a conversation with your husband or your wife or your significant other, and there's one person that's typically calm, and there's one person that kind of escalates the situation. I'm not saying it's always them. I'm not saying it's always me. And you guys know what I'm saying. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other. But as the passion starts going, it's because you feel like the point you're trying to make that you've already said, it's not making a dent. So you think, you know what? How about I say it more passionately, as if they didn't hear me? And the effect that you wanted it to have, the exact opposite is what it has. And just like with us, this is exactly what happens with Job. Same thing. So real quick, Job 26, which is part of his rebuttal to Bildad's 6-verse exhortation there, you're going to know 4 key things. Job's going to touch on God's absolute sovereignty. He's going to say things like, he holds power over the grave, stretch the heavens. We're going to get into, I think, why he emphasized that. He's going to also talk about the limits to humans' understanding and human knowledge of God. And then he compares our knowledge to God's knowledge and how minuscule and inferior our knowledge is. And then he's going to take some shots at his friends. He's going to rebuke his friends and basically sarcastically state he's going to flip their questions that they asked him or they accused him of, not helping the poor, not helping. I think last week Eliphaz was talking about he was, stealing from the poor and such. Well, Job's going to reverse that in his final commentary to his friends. And what's interesting is the next 3 chapters, and we're going to go through all of them, 26, 27, and 28, and I think 29, is all Job's rebuttals to his friends, all three of them. As he's speaking to all of them almost at the same time, in previous points that they made. So with that, Job 26:1. But Job answered and said, how have you helped him who was without power? How have you saved the arm that has no strength? How have you counseled one who has no wisdom? And how have you declared sound advice to many? To whom have you uttered words, and whose spirit came from you? See, this is basically Job coming out with some sarcastic shots of his own. So Bildad has just previously accused him in previous debates, previous rounds of his debate, of saying that, yeah, you didn't do this, this, and this. You got this hidden evil, blah, blah, blah. This is Job reversing that to him, sarcastically saying, well, oh, okay. Well, based on your standard for righteousness, how do you stack up to that? It's kind of it kind of gives me Pharisee vibes. Job is calling them a hypocrite now, essentially. And pretty interesting stuff how he takes these sarcastic shots. It's almost, to paraphrase it, it would be as if Job was saying, thanks, you guys have been a big help, but you haven't even done this stuff. So what are you even talking to me about it for? Right? He goes on, verse 5. The deed tremble, those under the waters and those inhabiting them. Sheol is naked before him. So you notice how his commentary shifts. I'm just going to pause there for a second. Between verse 4, where he kind of concludes that thought as he starts asking them these rhetorical questions, these sarcastic questions that we just went through. And he pivots to kind of going back to explaining God. And this is a direct rebuttal to what Bildad just said in chapter 25, the previous chapter. And I'll kind of line that up once we get through with the chapter. The dead tremble, those under the waters and those inhabiting them. Sheol is naked before him, and destruction has no covering. He stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. I love that part. He binds up the water in his thick clouds, yet the clouds are not broken under it. He covers the face of his throne and spreads his cloud over it. He drew a circular horizon on the face of the waters, at the boundary of light and darkness. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his rebuke. He stirs up the sea with his power, and by his understanding he breaks up the storm. By his spirit he adorned the heavens. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. Interesting, that reference. Indeed, these are mere edges of his ways. And how small a whisper we hear of him, but the thunder of his power, who can understand? So here's what's happening in these verses 5 through 14, which we just read. This is Job, quadrupling down on God's authority and power. And when Job does this, he does this as a disarming tactic almost. I don't know if he's intentionally doing it, but I'll explain to you how this disarming tactic works whenever you're going through debates and such, and understanding how to communicate with others. It's a very simple technique, which we'll talk about. But Bildad, as a result of this, you can tell is very upset. He's extremely frustrated because he believes, just like we all would be. I mean, there isn't anything extra special about it. When I can't get my point across and I believe I'm right, I get frustrated because it doesn't seem like you're hearing me. It's like it's so obvious to me, but even though whether I be right or wrong, my position is so obvious to me, and I try to explain it to you, and I just assume, dude, how could you not see it like I'm seeing it? Like what it is. I mean, this grass is green right here. Like, that's how obvious it is. But understanding that it's not that obvious to others. And so he's frustrated because Job doesn't see it the way he sees it. And in fact, Job is right. So an example of that is If you've ever experienced this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna try to explain it simply. So sometimes when someone's trying to prove they're right, and you take what they say, so they make a statement, and then you take what they've said and you repeat it back to them, and you put even more emphasis than what they did, almost like you're agreeing with them, and then you're also doubling down on it and taking it even a step further. The result of it is it dilutes their argument and it softens their position in the debate. So let me give you an example. So let's just say we're in a debate about how good this Fuji apple was, right? So you tell me, or I would tell you, this apple is the best. Man, I don't care what you say. I don't care what she says. This apple is the absolute best. And your apple and everybody else's apple is trash compared to this apple. This apple is the best. And then you respond to my point and you say, without a doubt, not only is that apple that you have the best and the brightest, it's the juiciest apple ever. And it's the best, not only apple, it's above all the other fruits, without question. You kind of see what happened there? You took my position. You took my position over. My point was, hey, this is the best fruit. This is the best apple right here. You took my point and you hijacked it from me. And as you can see, just like you can with Bildad, there's behind his comments, there's a hint of I'm right and you're wrong. Little ego there, right? But then in the example, you diffused my entire argument by restating and emphasizing the point that I just made. And when you did that, you took the whole sting out of all my comments through your over-agreeance with me, if that's a word. I think so. Over-agreeance with me. And so in sales, we call it a spin tactic. It's very common to be used in negotiations to disarm and avoid potential disastrous outcomes. So like as an example, if I'm in sales and somebody's not pleased with something they bought and they're upset, man, your company's sorry. And then you come back in, you doggone right they're sorry. There's no way that should have happened. See how you just disarmed them? Just that simple. And that's what's happening here. Bildad is trying to be passive aggressive and basically call Job a worm, right? Under the guise of man is nothing but a worm. Well, Job is a man. So if you're saying man is nothing but a worm, you're saying Job is a worm. That's just passive aggressive way of saying that, right? And Job takes the venom out of it because he basically goes, exactly. That's what I've been trying to tell you guys. 100%. And even greater is God over all things. Not just the sun and the moon that you were talking about. Like, that's like nothing. I'm talking about over death, over Sheol or Hades. That's another word for Hades. He stirs up the sea. His understanding breaks up storms. His spirit adorns the heavens. He hangs the earth on, without, what did it say right there? He hangs the earth on nothing. So he like quadruples down on Bildad's point. And where does Bildad left to go? Nowhere, but sit in the corner. That's how communication works. Interesting. I'll move on. Chapter 27. Moreover, Job continued his discourse and said, as God lives, who has taken away my justice, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter. As long as my breath is in me and the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should say you are right till I die. I will put not away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live. Okay, so let me stop there. So in that position, that's victory. That's confirmation that it's nothing you three can say I'm not going to break. I mean, personally, I've won debates, I've lost debates, and I'm sure you've experienced it too. But in either outcome, won or lost, there's a point in the conversation where you can sense the outcome. Either win or loss. You can sense it. And once Job utters verses 1 through 6, his friends know it's over. There's no way he's going to relent his position. And guess what? Satan knows it too. Let's not forget that. Verses 7 through 12. May my enemy be like the wicked, and he who rises up against me like the unrighteous. For what is the hope of the hypocrite, though he may gain much if God take away his life? Will God hear his cry when trouble comes upon him? Will he delight himself in the Almighty? Will he always call on God? I will teach you about the hand of God. What is with the Almighty, I will not conceal. Surely all of you have seen it. Why then do you behave with complete nonsense? See, again, at this point, as I said, they know the debate is over. They've run out of points to make. They haven't been able to derail or debunk or discourage Job's position. And just like with Job, with us, at some points, when you've won a debate, sometimes you decide to provide further emphasis on the points. And then you may tend to get a little passive aggressive with your victory lap. And yeah, those last 2 verses was kind of a low-key shot by Job when he says, I will teach you about the hand of God. What is with the Almighty, I will not conceal. Surely all of you have seen it. Why then do you behave with complete nonsense? Now, you know Job knew that they'd seen that before. He knew that. And you would all know that based on their comments. And then sometimes you just have human moments. But that was definitely, to me, I see that as a passive-aggressive shot. When you say, I will teach you, surely you've seen it. Why do you behave with some complete nonsense? Yeah, ouch. Moving on. This is the portion of the wicked man with God. Okay, so I got to stop right there. So if you've listened and been a part of the previous lessons, you've got to listen to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar all talk about the wicked man and what he gets. What is wicked and what he gets, the results of him being wicked. This is Job saying, okay, you've given me your definition about it. Now I will give you mine. This is the portion of a wicked man with God and the heritage of oppressors received from the Almighty. If his children are multiplied, it is for the sword. And his offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Those who survive him shall be burned in death, and their widows shall not weep. Though he heaps up silver like dust and piles up clothing like clay, he may pile it up, but the just will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. He builds his house like a moth, like a booth which a watchman makes. The rich man will lie down, but not be gathered up. He opens his eyes, and he is no more. Terrors overtake him like a flood. The tempest steals him away in the night. The east wind carries him away, and he is gone. It sweeps him out of his place. It hurls against him and does not spare. He flees desperately from its power. Men shall clap their hands at him and shall hiss him out of his place. So here's what is really interesting in those verses. Starting with verse 13. Again, I understand what you guys said, but this is the portion of a wicked man. I've listened to all of you guys tell me what it is. Now I'm going to tell you my definition of it. What's interesting is as Job continues to explain what he feels the wicked is and what their just reward is, it addresses different points that they made in their previous arguments, they being his friends. So if you notice verse 14, it says, if his children are multiplied, it is for the sword, and his offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Well, if you recall, a few weeks ago, one of them was making comments about his kids. Verse 16, though he heaps up silver like dust and piles up clothing like clay, he may pile it up, but the just will wear it, and the innocent people will divide the silver. If you recall, one of his friends told him that he was taking advantage of the poor. He was abusing his power and his authority that he had. So you can see, and there's other examples that I won't get into because I don't have time, but each one of these verses, like when he talks about the terrors overtaking him like a flood, Eliphaz in the previous verse, or maybe it was Zophar, in his previous rebuttal, was talking about terrors coming at night. And this is Job's rebuttal to their arguments. And he's directly addressing it. So if you want to get a mental picture of it, think of it as Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and Job is kind of sitting here in the middle, kind of debating them. And now that Bildad is done making his comments, Zophar was already done, Eliphaz was done last week. Now Job is like, oh, okay, so this is how you guys want to do it? This is what's going on here. This is my counter and reference about my kids. This right here is my reference to what you said earlier. And he's just kind of going down through the line in these next couple chapters. And this is the start of it in chapter 27. Chapter 28, verse 1. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth and copper is melted from ore. Man puts an end to darkness and searches every recess for ore in the darkness and the shadows of death. He breaks open a shaft away from people. In places forgotten by feet, they hang far away from men. They swing to and fro. As for the earth, from it comes bread, but underneath it turns up as fire. Its stones are the source of sapphires, and it contains gold dust. That path no bird knows, nor has the falcon's eye seen it. The proud lions have not trodden it, nor has the fierce lion passed over it. He puts his hand on the flint. He overturns the mountains at the roots. He cuts out the channels in the rocks, and his eye sees every precious thing. He dams up the streams from trickling. What is hidden he brings forth to light. Okay, so verses 1 through 11 is basically Job continuing the discourse from the previous chapter. He's now giving them examples of things that are correlated together that man could not have made, that only God could be the author of. When he says stuff like, he puts his hand on the flint, he overturns the mountains at the roots, he cuts out channels in the rocks, his eye sees every precious thing. He's talking about God there. But when he's using examples like, for ore in the darkness and the shadow of death, he breaks up the shaft away from people. In places forgotten by feet, they hang far away from men and they swing to and fro. He's just using examples and analogies of where God is and his awesome power and where man is. And he's very, very limited power. Verse 12. But where can wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its value. When it's its value, it's being wisdom, the reference to wisdom. Nor is it found in the land of the living. The deep says, it is not with me. So basically what he's saying there is, man doesn't understand the value of wisdom. We can't comprehend it. Nor is it found in the land of the living, meaning that there's no one on earth, which is the land of the living, that can comprehend where wisdom is found and the value of it. The deep says, it is not in me. And the sea says, it is not with me. The deep is what the Bible references as kind of underneath the sea, if you will, or underneath the earth. And the sea, obviously, you guys know what that is. It cannot be purchased for gold, nor can silver be weighed for its price. Still talking about wisdom here. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphires, meaning it can't be measured in riches. Nor can it be exchanged for jewelry or fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or quartz, for the price of wisdom is above rubies. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. So what he's saying there is he's using these examples of these really, really almost like the most precious stones that you could have found at that time, like the topaz of Ethiopia, pure gold, right? Coral or quartz, which would have been valued minerals, right, at that time. The gold of Ophir. Ophir was known to have some of the highest quality gold at that time. So in any case, Job is explaining to them, wisdom can't be found or traded for or bought or subjugated by any of these things. Okay? And then in verse 20 he says, from where then does wisdom come? Interesting question. Very interesting question. And what I find even more interesting is he introduced this question, and it's clearly a rhetorical question, but he's doing this to set up his point. And then more on what wisdom is and where it comes from in here in a second. Verse 21. It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. Destruction and death say, we have heard a report about it with our ears. So he's saying that no one knows wisdom. Forces on the earth don't know wisdom. He's saying even destruction and death say, we heard a report about it, meaning that we don't know it. Okay? Then in verse 23 says, God understands its way, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees under the whole heavens, to establish a weight for the wind, an appropriation of waters by measure. When he made a law for the rain and a path for the thunderbolt, he saw wisdom and declared it. He prepared it. Indeed, he searched it out. And to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to depart from evil is understanding. So what's interesting is he starts out with this rhetorical question. What is wisdom? And then he ends verse 28 with his thoughts on wisdom. And if you notice within the flow of the conversation there, you notice how much more emphatic his answer for what wisdom is, because he asked that rhetorical question back in verse 20. And by stating it the way that Job did, he's basically saying to his friends, you thought you had wisdom. You thought you were wise coming to me with your comments. You thought, and whether he was saying, hey, and I appreciate you doing it or whatever the case may be. But he's clearly stating to them, this is wisdom. Not what y'all were spitting, not even what I was spitting earlier. This is wisdom. The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. So go ahead and break out your highlighters and highlight that. That's a good one. Okay. Job 29 is a very interesting chapter. We're going to blow through it right quick. What this is Job has essentially rested his case to his friends at this point. And verse 29, he starts to think about and take a sum of what he's lost. He starts to reminisce that a little bit. Job further continues his discourse and says, oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, just as I was in the days of my prime, when the friendly counsel of God was over my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were around me, when my steps were bathed with cream, and the rock poured out rivers of oil for me. When I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the open square, the young men saw me and hid, and the aged aroused and stood, talking about respect. And princes refrained from talking and put their hand on their mouth. The voice of nobles was hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouth. Interesting. When the ear heard, then it blessed me. And when the eye saw, then it approved me. Because I delivered the poor who cried out, the fatherless, and the one who had no helper. The blessing of the perishing man came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind, and I was feet to the lame. I was father to the poor, and I stretched out the case that I did not know. I broke the fangs of the wicked and plucked the victim from his teeth. Then I said, I shall die in my nest and multiply my days as the sand. My root is spread out to the waters, and dew lies all night on my branch. My glory is fresh within me, and my bow is renewed in my hand. Men listened to me and waited and kept silence for my counsel. After my words they did not speak again, and my speech settled on them as dew. They waited on me as for rain, and they opened their mouth wide as for the spring rain. If I mocked at them, they did not believe it, and the light of my countenance they did not cast down. I chose the way for them, and sat as chief, so I dwelt as a king in the army, as one who comforts mourners. So again, you see in chapter 29, Job is taking account of what his old standing was, what he lost. And when you read that, you really get an insight as to, man, how really strong he was in his faith and his conviction with God. Because what Job describes there is a king. I mean, when I walk on the scene, people, they be quiet. The old men stand. The young kids go around. Everybody stops talking. Probably whispering, there goes that man. I mean, he lost a lot. He lost a lot of standing. He lost a lot of respect. And he was humiliated. Now he's sitting in the streets, basically lost it all, with boils and in sackcloth and ashes. Crazy. Verse 29, verse 30, and verse 31, chapter 29, which we just read, chapter 30 and chapter 31. Interesting is that, I'll just read it to you. But now they mock me. So you see the transition from what was to what is. But now they mock me. Men younger than I, whose fathers I disdain to put with the dogs in my flock. Man, he's saying the lowest of the low, their kids now mock me. Indeed, what profit is the strength of their hands to me? Their vigor have perished. They are gaunt from want and famine, fleeing late in the wilderness, desolate and waste, who pluck mallow by the bushes and broom tree roots for their fruit. I mean, that's like the poorest of the poor basically saying is making fun of him now. He's lower than them is what he's describing there. They were driven out from among men. They shouted at them as at a thief. They had to live in the clefts of the valleys, in the caves of the earth and the rocks. Among the bushes they brayed, under the nettles they nestled. They were sons of fools, yes, sons of vile men. They were scourged from the land. These are the people he's talking about that are mocking him right now. So he went from well respected in chapter 29, what he describes in that chapter, up into chapter 30, which is his current state. Verse 9, and now I am their taunting song. Yes, I am their byword. They abhor me and they keep far from me. They do not hesitate to spit in my face, because he has loosed my bowstring and afflicted me, meaning he's undone. They have cast off restraint before me, and my right hand the rabble arises. They push away my feet, they raise against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path, they promote my calamity. They have no helper. They come as broad breakers. Under the ruinous storm they roll along. Terrors are turned upon me. They pursue my honor as the wind, and my prosperity has passed like a cloud. And now my soul is poured out because of my plight. My days of affliction take hold of me. My bones are pierced in me at night, and my gnawing pains take no rest. By great force my garment is disfigured. It binds me about as the collar of my coat. He has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry out to you, but you do not answer me. I stand up, and you regard me. But you have become cruel to me. With the strength of your hand, you oppose me. This is Job speaking to God. You lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride upon it. You spoil my success. And I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all living. Surely he would not stretch out his hand against a heap of ruins if they cry out when he destroys it. Have I not wept for him who is in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? But when I looked for good, evil came to me. And when I waited for light, then came darkness. I mean, you can see his confusion there. My heart is in turmoil and cannot rest. Days of affliction confront me. I go about mourning, but not in the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry out for help. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. That's not good. And my skin grows black and falls from me. My bones burn with fever. My harp is turned to mourning, and my flute is the voice of those who weep. So it's interesting there. Again, this is Job's current state. Chapter 29 was Job's what he was. This is what he is. And chapter 31, as he concludes, is what he will become toward the end. I'm going to try to read 31 right quick, and then I will briefly cap it, and then we'll conclude. I have made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I look upon a young woman? For what is the allotment of God from above, and the inheritance of the Almighty from on high? Is it not destruction for the wicked and disaster for workers of iniquity? Does he not see my ways and count on my steps? If I have walked with falsehood, or if my foot is hastened to deceit, let me be weighed on honest scales, that God may know my integrity. If my step is turned from the way, or my heart is walked after my eyes, or if any spot adheres to my hands, then let me sow, and another eat. Yes, let my harvest be rooted out. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's house, then let my wife want for another, and let others bow down over her. For that would be wickedness. Yes, it would be iniquity deserving of judgment. For that it would be fire that consumes to destruction, and will root out all my increase. If I have despised the cause of my male or female servant, when they complained against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he punishes, how shall I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make them? Did not the same one fashion us in the womb? If I have kept the poor from their desire, or caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or eaten my morsel by myself, so that the fatherless could not eat of it, but from my mouth I reared him as a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. You can kind of hear the controversy as you're kind of going through the verses. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or any poor man without covering, if his heart has not blessed me, and if he was not warm with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, when I saw I had help in the gate, then let my arm fall from my shoulder. Let my arm be torn from the socket. For destruction from God is a terror to me. And because of his magnificence, I cannot endure. If I have made gold my hope, or said to find gold, you are my confidence, if I have rejoiced because my wealth was great, and because my hand had gained much, if I observe the sun when it shines, or the moon moving in brightness, so let my heart be secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand, as if pride setting in, is what he's talking about there in verse 25, 26, and 27. This also will be iniquity deserving of judgment. So if you see real quick, he's giving examples of what he feels is sin that should have brought on the results that he is getting. He's basically saying, well, hey, if I would have discredited the poor, if I would have committed adultery, if I would have, with someone else's wife, or if I coveted somebody else's stuff, or if I lied on them, or steal from them, then yeah, this is wickedness that I can understand getting this punishment. But I'm innocent of all these things. That's his argument here in verse 31. If I have rejoiced at the destruction of him who hated me, or lifted myself up when evil found him, indeed, I have not allowed my mouth to sin by asking for a curse on his soul. If men of my tent have not said, who is there, that has not been satisfied with his meat. But no sojourner had to lodge in the street, for I have opened my doors to the traveler. If I have covered my transgressions as Adam, there's your Adam reference, by hiding in my iniquity in my bosom, because I feared the great multitude and dreaded the contempt of families, so that I kept silent and did not go out of the door. Oh, that I had one to hear me. Here's my mark. Oh, that the Almighty would answer me, that my prosecutor had written a book. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder and bind it on me like a crown. I would declare to him the number of my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. Meaning I would not be ashamed to say, I did this. And he compared himself to Adam. He says, unlike Adam, who was covered by his transgressions, I wouldn't do that. I would come out and say, hey, I did this. Verse 38. If my land cries out against me and my furrows weep together, if I have eaten its fruit without money, or caused its owners to lose their lives, then let thistles grow instead of wheat, and weeds instead of barley. The words of Job are ended. So, at the end of all the go-rounds, the back and forth and all of that with his buddies, Job stays faithful, man. And that's his conclusion. He's saying, I rest my case. I'm innocent. I should not be punished like this. I need some mercy. I would like an explanation as to why I'm getting punished. So, with that, next week, we're going to go over Elihu as we're done talking with Job. Job has rested his case with the council. Any questions? Thank you for watching, and may the Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent one from another.